Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We might make a start. Welcome to the Georges River Local Planning Panel meeting for the 5th of September 2019. This panel has been appointed by the Minister for Planning and the Council to determine certain types of development applications, modification applications, and also to consider planning proposals if applicable. They are today. We've got two matters before us. All these matters are on the agenda and have been reported on through the business paper in accordance with the Code of Conduct governing this panel and the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. My name is Paul Vagotis and I'm the chairperson for today's panel meeting. The other panelist with me today is, to my right is Juliette Grant, one of our experts. To my immediate left is John Brockhoff, one of our experts, and to my far left is Mr. Aaron Sellers, our community representative. I'm obliged to advise you that this meeting is being audio and video recorded and is available to be heard on the Council's website. Any part of this meeting that is held in a closed session will not be recorded. When speaking on a matter before the panel, any person registered to make submissions must ensure their oral presentations are respectful and that appropriate language is used at all times. Any person using defamatory, discriminatory or offensive language may be exposed to personal liability, which the panel or the council take no responsibility for. At today's meeting, the panel will consider and determine two development applications and one modification application, and we'll also make a recommendation in relation to two planning proposals. All of these matters have been assessed and reported on by council staff. The panel has, prior to this meeting, undertaken site inspections earlier today for each of the development applications, the modification application and the two planning proposals, and also visited adjoining properties where it was appropriate to do so. Consideration of the matters before the panel today will be undertaken in order of the meeting agenda, which is as follows: 2 to 4 Vaughan Street, Blakehurst; 5 to 9 John Street, Cogra Bay; 13 Derby Street, Cogra; lots 1 and 2 Taylor's Reserve, Lugano; and 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra. As required by the Code of Conduct, all panellists are required to disclose any pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest in relation to any matter on today's agenda to be considered by the panel. Prescribed conflict of interest forms issued by the Department of Planning and Environment have been completed by each panellist for each of the items today on today's agenda. These forms are now tabled and are available for public scrutiny during the meeting, and they'll also be available for viewing on the Council's website and within the minutes of the meeting. We do have a declaration of interest by one of our panellists, and by all means you're quite welcome to have a look at that interest. In addition to the conflict of interest declarations, all panellists are required to complete, under the Code of Conduct, an annual written disclosure of pecuniary interests. These disclosures must be completed on the prescribed form and returned to myself for tabling at the panel meeting, and they have been so. These disclosures are now available also for public viewing, and they'll be also available for viewing on the Council's website. Also, these disclosures will be submitted to the General Manager for the keeping in the appropriate register. As we progress through the agenda, only those persons who have been registered to speak will be permitted to make oral submissions to the panel. As the chairperson, of course, I may exercise discretion to overrule this restriction and to allow any unregistered person to make a submission. Submitters making submissions will be given 3 minutes to speak through to the panel. And again, as the chairperson, I may permit extra time where appropriate to do so. Submitters are reminded to speak clearly and concisely into the microphone for recording purposes. Please do not repeat matters that have already been raised by previous submitters. After all submitters have finished their submissions, they should remain seated to permit any panellist to ask questions arising from their submissions. Once all submitters for all matters on the agenda have concluded, the panel will adjourn for its closed session to deliberate and make determinations in relation to the development applications, modification applications and the planning proposals. The determinations of the panel will be recorded in the minutes, which will be available for viewing on the Council's website. Finally, for all those persons in attendance today that might have a mobile phone, can you please make sure it's on silent or switched off? Thank you. I'll now call for the first item on the agenda, which is 2 to 4 Vaughan Street, Blakehurst. And we have registered to speak, firstly, Sharon Huan, One. Please come forward, ma'am. Please take a seat, and if you could speak clearly into the microphone. Thank you.
As local resident of this area, we wish to object the DA for the following reason. Number one, issue during the construction period. Due to proximity to our residents, the excavation and construction may cause structural damage to our house. The noise and pollution may be bearable by adults, but we have two small children whose health may be affected. Number two, the large increase in height and but will cause very large rules of privacy. The DA have window opening directly overlook into our house. Nearly all of our living space will be under inventory surveillance. This is totally unacceptable. Number three, 38 car space onto Steelwood Lane will cause huge traffic issue related to both congestion and safety. Number four, the proposed DA have only 1 fire stairs for 24 apartments, which is a huge risk when the building is on fire. Number five, the garbage bin room in the DA is too close to the neighbors. When the garbage truck collecting 30 bins, it will have a huge impact on the neighborhood. The landscape design in the DA is not efficient. It does not look like the natural trees can grow. Number eight, leaf court and walkway in the DA is too close to the neighbor's house, which can be very noisy when the leaf is running. Thank you for taking our objection and subjection into account.
All right. Just remain seated, and I'll see if there are any questions.
So which property are you, what's your address? Where are you?
6 Stewart Street, Breakfast. 6.
What number?
6.
Number
6
6.
Stewart,
yeah.
right.
6 Stewart. Okay. Anything further? John?
No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next submitter is Jaiho Chen. Please come forward, sir. And you're at number 5, Stewart Street, is that correct?
Right. Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
from number 5, Stewart Street. I'm not in support of the proposed DA of the agenda, as I think the proposed agenda is totally ridiculous. 23 units of 5 floors is going to be built in the middle of a single houses, which will impact on the left-hand side neighbors, especially their privacy and the sunlight. The second, I also think this will impact the overall planning of our community. The third, 39 parking spaces on the Stewart Lane, which is a very narrow road. So will cause big problem of the traffic. Thank you very much.
Please remain seated. I'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Our next submitter is Robbie Owaj. Please come forward, sir. And you're at number 2?
That's correct.
Stewart Street. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and the council. I object the DA on just few merits. My house is on 2 Stewart Street, which is on the corner of Stewart Street and Stewart Lane.
We visited your house today.
Yes, my wife said that. So as you can appreciate, there's a car park, the driveway. In the plans, it shows next to it is also the entrance of the 24, 23 apartments, which I think is going to pose a little bit of a risk because as cars go in and out, it might be subject to high traffic. Also, you'll notice there's a new development that's just almost completed. It used to be the marina in Blakehurst, and that's about 61 apartments. A very popular Chinese restaurant is there, and it's always busy. So that Stewart Lane is extremely very busy. Number 2, the developer or the owner has purchased those 2 and number 4 Vaughan Street, which is fantastic. But in the future, the owners of James Street, those 4 properties, and the owners of the Stewart Street properties, that means you can have 3 DAs in total. A lot of setbacks. And my proposal is if he buys all the lots, then fine. But you're going to have a lot more setbacks, more traffic. My suggestion is that if there's going to be a car park, it has to be on Vaughan Street, not Stewart Lane. The construction of that site, 5 stories. At the moment, when I look, you have blue skies, but you're going to have a major construction that's going to cause shadow and privacy issue as well. There is in the report, it mentions of the 2 Stewart Street, the intrusive noise factor, which is a concern. And another thing which is probably irrelevant, but with the construction that's already in Marina, a lot of the concrete trucks are coming through the corner of Stewart Street and Stewart Lane. They've already damaged the council curb. Yeah. And I've already requested for repair, but they said pending on this DA, which poses a foot traffic issue. I'm all for the DA if they want to fix it, but personally to have 24 or 23 apartments in such a small lot, I think it's a bit of an overkill, but that's my personal opinion. Thank you.
All right. Please remain seated and I'll see if there are any questions.
No questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Our next submitter, speaking on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Andrew Darroch. Mr. Darroch, come forward.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Darroch. I'm the town planner for the applicant. I am sympathetic to what the residents have said, but clearly the land has been rezoned.
Can you talk into your...
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Pull it closer to you, if you wouldn't mind. That's better.
Yep. But clearly the land has been rezoned with a set of controls on it, and there is a certain expectation that there will be a level of development on all of these sites behind the business zone.
I don't think that's lost on the panel. We understand the rezoning and we understand it's permissible. I think we'd like you to look at the reasons that have been set out in the report.
I certainly intend to. Yeah. I was just responding to the residents and not ignoring
Thank you.
What they had to say. But during the last 5 years, we've taken every application straight to court. And this time we were told by the officers, things are different, work with us. We've spent 9 months, had minimal direction, minimal communication, and we now have this report, and it seems pretty obvious we're back to court again. I find the report very confused and confusing. I've read it half a dozen times, but I'll try and summarize how I understand what the report is saying. But if we start with the compliance, the proposal complies with the LEP height control. That's not in dispute. The proposal's well under the FSR control. In fact, it's 1.34 to 1, so it's 200 square metres of floor space under the control. The proposal complies with the minimum lot size by more than 30%, so it's more than a third larger than it should be. It complies with the site isolation, and we've demonstrated, and we've have it in your plan sets, how the sites to the north and the south are going to be developed in the future following these same controls. We comply with a minimum site width of 20 metres. We comply with the site density control. We comply with the car parking. The report seems to me to be saying we comply with the Australian standards, and our advice is we comply with Australian standards, but we're told the parking is difficult. My understanding is you either comply with the Australian standards or you don't comply with the Australian standards. I don't understand what difficult is if you're complying with the standards. We comply with the bicycle parking. We comply with bin storage, but we see there's a preference for it to be relocated to the basement. That's certainly possible. You'll notice that we've got 1.5 basements. It's a fairly easy thing for us to expand that half basement to accommodate whatever changes are necessary. We just need to be asked and given some direction. And certainly if there's a need for a bulky goods store, it can be accommodated. We comply with the front setback control, with 66% of the building being at 7 metres and 34% being at 5 metres. But the report says that we don't, and I would just ask you to actually measure it on the drawings, because that's a matter of fact. We comply with the site coverage. We're 40%, where we're allowed to be 45. We've got 2 areas of communal open space, one on the roof, one at the rear of the building. We get more than the 50% required solar access under the ADG. We comply with the impervious area, where the control's 55%, we're 39%. We comply with the solar access, with 19 of the units, or 83%, being north-facing, getting 8 hours of sun a day. We don't affect anybody's views. We comply with the adaptable and livable units. If there's a preference to change the mix, we can change the mix. Just ask us. It's easily done. Where the report says we don't comply, it says we don't comply with the deep soil requirement. The deep soil requirement we know under the AGG is 7%. We are 16.6%, and we've consolidated it in 2 areas in order to support the 2 significant trees that have been identified as being necessary to be kept in the neighbourhood. The report says that the proposal will affect the canopy of the ironbark, which is the tree to the north, and the lemon-scented gum, which is the tree to the south. And I expect you were out there and had a good look at those trees.
Yeah, we did.
I've actually got an aerial photograph from the 1st of July this year and superimposed the level 5 floor plan on it to demonstrate just how minimal the impact to those canopies are. So
Yeah, I think I'd like you to address us on the possible pruning of that tree, if that's going to happen.
Our arborist says...
You say it's not going to happen.
Pardon? No. There will be no need to prune the north tree because we're not near it, and you can see from that.
Yeah, that's the one down on the boundary.
Yep. The lemon-scented gum is 2 metres into the neighbouring property.
That's correct.
There will be some minor pruning on that tree, and our arborist says it's not going to affect the health or vigour of that tree.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. If your train of thought was elsewhere.
No, I can certainly get back to it. So there are those copies for yourselves and for the council officers on the aerial photograph.
Okay.
The report says that we don't comply with the 9-metre separation for part level 5. This is a requirement under Part 2 of the ADG. We've been through this in court. It's been established. Part 2 is for strategic planning. It's not for DA assessment. And again, I imagine you all have your ADG, but if you don't, I've brought Part 2, and it says, Part 2, it provides tools to support the strategic planning process when preparing planning controls. What that allows is the council to decide what its setback controls are. In this instance, the council has decided the formula for the setback controls, and we comply with that. 5.25 metres for the first floor levels, we're 6 metres. 6 metres for the 5th level, we're between 6 and 9 metres for the 5th level. The only part that doesn't comply is where we've located the stair and lift. Now, that's been located in that area in order to respond to the trees and has the dual benefit of effectively being completely screened by the tree to the south. We've maintained those open corridors to minimise the extent of that bulk. We've got 200 square metres, we could close them all in. There's no issue with that. We think that's a better solution. And certainly, in terms of Part 3 of the ADG and the separation, we have no windows to habitable rooms or balconies within 9 metres of the boundary. The there's a criticism of the rooftop communal open space not being set back 9 metres from the boundary. But it doesn't note that we have done what is normally acceptable and provided a metre of perimeter planting, obscured glass balustrades, all to deal with the sightlines towards the neighbouring properties when they developed, or at the moment and when they developed in the future. The report says we don't comply with the ground level private open space where 7 units, so 7 of our units have 33.6 square metre courtyards and the others are all up to 100 square metres. The ADG requirement is 15 square metres, not the 36 square metres. But again, it's something that can easily be dealt with if that was an issue. We've been following the ADG. We then are criticised for having 21% communal open space. Now, the DRP actually asked us to give that area to Unit 4 at the front of the building and expand its courtyard. If we need to move the fence further to the west again, so that its courtyard is less than 100 square metres and the communal open space is increased to 25%, it can be done. It's conditionable. It's a simple matter. And the report also says that Units 1 and Units 4 are subterranean. Unit 1 is 250 millimetres below the street level. Unit 4 is 400 millimetres below the street level. That meets every test of acceptability in terms of the relationship. What we've done is actually stepped that front part of the building. The site falls 1.6 metres across its length. We've actually stepped the units within the building in order to accommodate that and keep those changes minimal. And then there's a criticism of Units 1 and 4 only having entry off the streets. Again, that's a response to the design review panel, which particularly asked us to give them entries off the streets. We can reinstate a second entrance off the corridor as well. Again, it's a matter that's conditionable and easily done, if that is a concern. And quite a fundamental matter goes to the ground floor units are 2-storey units. They have their living areas at the ground floor and bedrooms on the level above. The majority of them face north and have very good northern exposure. All of them have been designed so that the back of the kitchen is no more than 8 metres from that living room window, so that there's no reliance on that southern window. That southern window is simply an obscured glass window to add effect to the unit and give it a sense of space. If there's a concern about the table within the communal open space being too close to the entries, it can be moved and that area can be landscaped. It's not a matter critical to the application. And then the report says we don't comply with 15% of the units receiving no sun because we're 17%. That can easily be conditioned by putting a skylight on the top unit. Essentially, the matter of 2 to 8 James Street is dealt with very, very clearly in the views from the sun in the plan set. It is absolutely clear that between 9 and 3, all of those houses as existing get compliant solar access to their outdoor open space and to their living spaces. And when those sites are developed in the future, they're quite easily going to achieve their 70% solar access on the sites. We've demonstrated that and we've gone through, we've provided the modelling and the massing. Effectively, I guess the part that rings the loudest to me is the comment that the design is monolithic, brutalist, modernist, and it's basically over bulk and over scale. If we are well below all of the controls, to me, that is a very difficult argument to make that you're out of scale. I have a concern in relation to that comment about the building because the montage you've got in the report is actually the wrong montage. That's the original montage before the building was amended for the design review panel. So that is the new montage, or the one that should be in your plan set.
Has that been provided to the council?
Yeah, it should be in your plan set, yeah. But I have them here anyway.
Yeah.
But that is the one that one should be considering in terms of whether this is an appropriate building or not.
Okay.
That's that one.
So that's revision C. What's your revision number?
C. C.
C. Okay.
So essentially, this proposal is completely compliant or through very minor conditions can achieve compliant. There are no major design changes in order to achieve compliance. All I would request is that the panel look very closely at this application and the drawings which have been presented and review the recommendation, please.
Okay. One question I had is in relation to the excavation of the basement car park and how that may affect the root zones of those.
Yep.
In particular, the bigger tree.
The lemon-scented gum.
Lemon-scented gum.
Yep.
Yeah.
Drawing A21, if we go to drawing A21. There was also a mention in the report that there wasn't an established TPZ for that tree. The arborist report, and I've got a copy of it here, gives the TPZ for both the northern tree and the southern tree. A21.
Yep.
Puts those on. These have all been prepared with the arborist. And you'll see in terms of the lemon-scented gum, there's the 9.6 metre TPZ. Those are all of the incursions that are in that TPZ, and it's less than 10%. Exactly the same. The building has specifically been located in this way in order to protect those trees both below ground and above ground.
Right. So, Mr. Durrock, that's your submission?
That's my submission.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions. Juliet?
Yeah, if the panel were of a mind to consider an alternate to the council's recommendation, there's nowhere on the plans that showed a substation, and I'm assuming that a development this scale would require a substation.
Yeah, we haven't been asked to provide a substation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I presume just, that amount of demand on power. I presume the network, most of the other developments are required. The question would be, if you do require one, where could it go in terms of an appropriate location, and then what would that do to your other compliance
if we
gaps?
put the bin room below ground or in the basement, there would certainly be the frontage on the lane to accommodate a kiosk. It would only be a above ground kiosk. It would not be large.
Although they do have quite big fire blast radius.
Spaces around them, exactly, but we could certainly accommodate it if we need to in that way.
Right. And because the bin store's not actually been counted in your GFA, which would actually, if it's not relocated to your basement, would actually be GFA, but it's not been included in your calcs.
But even then, we're 200 under. We're nowhere near topping out our GFA. But again, as you quite correctly point out, if it goes to the basement, it's storage.
Okay. No questions. Okay. Any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That concludes the first item. The decision will be taken later today and published on the council's website.
Sorry, Chair, did you want me to leave these
Yes,
aerial
if you wouldn't mind.
photos?
That'd be good.
So there are about 7 copies there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving to the next item on the agenda. It's the modification application for 5 to 9 John Street, Cogra Bay. We don't have anyone speaking against the proposal, but we do have 2 submitters for the proposal, Mr. Ziad Boheman and Mr. Jeffrey Mead. Would you gentlemen please come forward?
Thank you. Ziad is not here. He's a project architect, so I'll deal with the matter. I essentially don't have anything to say to the extent that we agree with the recommendation of the report, the assessment therein, and the conditions that are recommended. One procedural point that I'd ask the panel just to turn their mind to, in the condition that deals with the approved plans, there is just one plan that is missing, which is the roof plan.
That's condition number.
Condition 1A.
Yep.
Just requires below level 5 floor plan, the insertion of roof plan.
Okay, so between the words level 5 floor plan and elevation northeast,
Yes,
insert in there
roof plan.
roof plan.
Reference number is 2009 in the next column.
Yep.
The date is the 30th of the 7th in the next column. And revision I in the last column. Subject to that change, the other recommended conditions we are comfortable with.
All right. Panel, any questions?
I'd just be interested to understand the rationale for the change to the common communal open space along the boundary there. I mean,
Sure.
clearly it adds a benefit to those 2 ground floor units, one of which already has quite a substantial terrace area to the north. Yeah, I
Yes.
just noticed it in the court decision specifically talks about
Yes.
the benefit of having that communal open space and trees centrally located in there.
Yes, look, the rationale behind it is we are of the view that the approved plan was flawed in a design sense when you look at those units along that boundary. The common open space, as it was approved, effectively ran between the common boundary to the next property and the elevation of those units. And so effectively, we saw it as a major privacy issue, both visual and oral, to have a common open space running up to the windows of those units. The purpose of that common open space was always to be a passive open space with the ability for decent tree planting and so on within the deep soil area. That objective is still met to the extent that it's a common area, a passive common area that adds to the amenity both of those units that are next to it, but the development as a whole. So it's trying to remove that design flaw effectively. As you would have seen in the reasons for the 34 agreement, reference was made to the rooftop communal open space as being a good space and meeting the intent for common open space. So we see that as the active common open space fitted with a barbecue and seating areas and so on. And this is a passive area. And now we say that it improves the amenity of those units at the same time as removing that privacy issue.
I suppose when there's redevelopments either side or to the west and also to the south, that area will be probably a little bit shaded, but nonetheless the outlook, what you're saying is the outlook from these units in the bedrooms are improved?
That's correct, yes. And the open space on the roof obviously enjoys solar all day at midwinter.
Understand.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mead. That concludes that matter, and a decision will be taken by the panel later today and published on the council's website. Moving to the next item on the agenda is 13 Derby Street, Cogra. We have registered, no one registered to speak against the proposal, but we do have registered to speak Mr. Greg Boston. Mr. Boston, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, we've reviewed the report. We're obviously happy with the recommendation. We raise no objections to the conditions contained within the draft consent. However, we have raised a question with staff just regarding the calculation of the contributions. I'm not sure whether anything has come of that, but I'd simply ask the panel to put their mind towards ensuring that they're accurate. Apart from that, happy to answer any questions.
All right. So we'll just go to the condition.
I'm happy to
So
table.
it's
it's
condition 8.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
correct. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you say it should be?
Oh, look, certainly about half of what it's calculated at. The original application proposed additional units, and through the design review process, there was a number of apartments deleted. So I'm assuming they may well have been calculated off the original number of apartments. There's certainly currently only 5 proposed. One of those additional apartments is splitting of a previously approved 3-bedder.
Right.
So we say that, yeah, they seem to be about double what they should be.
Right. Right, okay, so as it stands now, it's $89,219.
Yeah, correct. So look,
You say it should be something in the vicinity of, what, 40?
yeah, look, that first sort of, the first column, let me just open that up. So for instance, that under development contributions, that first contribution for town centre streetscape comes out at 83.
Yeah.
I say that it should be around 40,000 just based on the contribution plan. However, I think the plan's 2016, so there's some CPI that needs to be worked into that. But I'm happy to hand up a copy of the email which I sent to council.
Yeah, right. If you wouldn't mind, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've seen it.
All right, we'll have a look at that. All right, I'll see if there are any questions. Yep.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Thank you.
That concludes that item. Decision will be taken later today and published on the council's website. Moving to the next item on the agenda, it is the planning proposal for Taylor's Reserve, Lugano. We have 3 submitters registered to speak. First one is Mr. Peter Hall.
Would you like me to go first?
Yes, I might just point out to the meeting that Ms Grant has declared an interest in this matter and will not participate in the consideration of this matter at all. Now, Mr Hall, you're at 1061B, Forest Road, Lugano.
That's correct, and I'm speaking in support of the application. And we're just on a bit of the brief history of it. The problem that has been going on there for even before 2000. Every resident, including me, had advised at various times that legal access would be granted over the reserve, and this is evident by the number of council resolutions. No resident has built an illegal structure that I'm aware all have been approved by council. It is not the resident's fault that access has not been formalised. I think it would be reasonable to assume that granting of subdivisions and construction approvals by council over time with no practical vehicle access to Forest Road at all was that the council had always fully intended to provide such legal access but had, for whatever reason, had not done so. In my own instance, I share an allotment of a 1 metre wide on Forest Road, up a cliff, so it's impractical you could even construct a vehicle access there, but they've approved a 3-car garage. The usage, I just want to clarify, in some of the reports it refers to the usage being solely by the residents or that have access to the access road, but it's through traffic, community, including children, dog owners, people exercising, people just relaxing in the park, on the bench park provided, people accessing the public toilet as a disabled facility. Utility vehicles also use the road as example, council garbage trucks, telecom, electricity, postal, couriers and community health, and emergency vehicles, ambulance, fire brigade and police. As to the potential, all residents believe that the access was in the process of being granted over the years, as previously mentioned, so there's no sudden gift of an access. The property, my property 1061B Forest Road is not mentioned as having any development potential because of its size, but to identify 4 properties have potential under 4.6 variation is fairly irrelevant, as that 4.6 variation is available to a number of residents throughout the municipality. The benefits, yes, the residents requiring vehicle access will get a benefit. It's easy to have one-sided view that the only ones that will benefit, but taking the other view, everybody would have to see that the park and the access road is used by a large number of people in the community who use the park. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll see if there are any questions of the panel. No questions? No. Thank you. Next submitter, Russell Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I live at 2A Woodlands Avenue, Lugano, which is basically the bottom property as you come into Woodlands Avenue there. I'd like to speak in support of the recommendation and just raise the following points. As Peter previously said, this has been going on for many years, and it's certainly the delays and uncertainty has placed a lot. It's unfair on the residents, and we just need a resolution to this matter. Obviously, council's approved subdivisions, houses, garages without formalising the access. It's been created by council, and it's fair and reasonable that it should be resolved by council. It's important to note that access has never been restricted, and I refer you to paragraph 97, of the report where it says the current informal road is part of land that is classified as community land and used by adjoining residents to access their property. It is understood that none of the properties have obtained consent from council for access for a specific purpose. I would have thought that by a resident applying to build a house and garage and by council approving it would indicate that council's consent has been obtained. Also, paragraph 106 refers to implications of the proposal and also the development potential unlocked by the planning proposal. Our property is listed as having the potential to have up to 4 dwellings as a result of the planning proposal. For the record, I'd just like it to be known that our property can currently be developed in this way and its development potential will not be increased as a result of the planning proposal. The main issue that needs to be highlighted is that our property consists of 2 lots. One lot has a frontage to Woodlands Avenue, which contains the house. However, the council-approved garage is accessed off Taylor's Reserve. And secondly, the other lot has no road frontage except to Taylor's Reserve, and this situation was also created by council. The report also raises the issue of properties increasing in value by some 9.2% as a result of being granted formal access. While we are not privy to this valuation advice, it would appear that such an increase seems excessive considering that the uninterrupted informal access has existed for over 40 years and has been without challenge. Residents have purchased their properties based on the access arrangements in good faith and should not be held accountable for decisions made by council. To make the comment that deprival of access would devalue the properties is not considered a realistic option and could result in compensation claims against council as indicated by their own legal advice. Also, the access way is a council asset that needs upgrading, which is no different to any road, footpath or car park within the council area. There is always someone who gets a benefit and that cost is based on the contribution that residents make in paying rates. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that the residents have always had uninterrupted access through Taylor's Reserve. This is their only physical access, which has been long-term and has been without challenge. Council has approved the subdivisions as well as dwellings, garages, etc. And as a result, this informal access arrangement was created by them and they have an obligation to resolve this issue in everyone's interests. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'll see if there are any questions. No questions. No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next submitter, Susan Brown. Ms Brown, I think we're across the benefits of the proposal as put to us. Right. So do you have anything further to add? Happy to let you elaborate on matters, but I'm just pointing out that I think it was quite clear from the 2 previous speakers that this access is long overdue.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think it's causing a major amount of angst and worry for the local residents as well.
Okay. And what is that?
Well, the fact that there's even been letters saying that they will consider cutting access off to our sites, to our homes.
Well, that's not the case here.
No,
I mean,
but
it's recommended that this proceed.
Yeah, but in the history of it,
right.
That's what's been actually suggested at one point. So, you know, there's been a dual occupancy subdivision that's occurred down there at 1055B, which has cut off vehicular access completely to that site from Forest Road. Yeah. And the council resolution of 2000 resolved to provide a public road without cost to the residents, and that latest resolution from 2018 confirms it. So it's causing major distress, and we'd just like to see it dealt with as quickly as possible, basically.
All right. Well, we have a recommendation before us today to adopt a planning proposal and recommend to the council. We can't make a decision with respect to that. We don't have power to, but the council does.
Yep. And
it's clear that from paragraphs 135 through to 148, the process. So there'll be, assuming this recommendation is adopted, then the process goes further, and then the reclassification goes ahead from community to operational land, and then the council makes its application to itself for the work on the road. And then that will be a separate process which you'll be notified about and you'll be given an opportunity to comment on.
Okay, all right, that's great. Can I just ask why Juliet Grant excused herself?
I think her firm, City Plan, was involved in one of the preliminary reports that was done some time ago. I understand from Ms Grant that she did not partake or get involved in that particular report, but her firm did.
Okay.
So just for abundant caution, she's declared an interest. All right, I'll just see if there's any questions of the panel.
No questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. That concludes that matter. A decision will be taken later today and published on the Council's website. Now it brings us to the matter of 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra. Thank you, Juliet. Now we have a number of submitters. The first submitter against the proposal is Anne Field. Ms. Field, are you in the gallery? Yes. Please proceed, ma'am.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the recommendation that the heritage listing should not be removed from 14 to 16 Victoria Street. If I can just give some in situ background. I was a social science teacher at St George Girls from 1977 to 2011, and my staff room looked over Victoria Street. So I had 35 years of appreciating, the character of the street. In 1999, I was elected to Cogra Council and served the constituents in North Ward, now part of Cogra Bay Ward, until 2008, and I served on the Urban Design and Planning Working Party and the Heritage LEP Task Group from 1999 to 2003, during which time these heritage listings were in fact gazetting. 3 years ago, I published a social history, the history of Moorfield Racecourse, Cogra. Gladstone Street, although we're talking about Victoria Street, this is fairly close to the, to the top of Gladstone Street, was a major thoroughfare for horses after they were offloaded from the train at Cogra Station that promoted the Cogra Township Estate subdivision of 1884. So I guess I'm setting some of the social background to the area. 14 and 16 Victoria Street make a positive contribution to the streetscape and provide evidence of our historical housing stock. They are certainly one of the LGA's better examples of 19th century residential development, and as such must be retained. On July the 28th, 2014, Cogra Council resolved to amend CLEP 2002, known as the New City Plan, which was gazetted on the 26th of May 2017. Public meetings and community groups addressed issues with the plans. Residents were well aware that the heritage listings would stay. Cogra North Urban Design Strategy subsequently set out a number of objectives, and that was to retain all the heritage buildings across the precinct and to encourage their preservation. The report before the planning panel addresses issues raised by the proponent and states that they can be mitigated and addressed through the existing planning process to ensure the amenity and the significance of the items are protected. Cogra North Precinct is about to see the area change greatly as a result of higher density apartments. We have few heritage buildings left in the area. The most recent DA for Gladstone Street has shown that heritage buildings can be incorporated into developments, and number 2 Victoria Street is to be included into this development. Council controls can give consent to development for any purpose of a building that is a heritage item, even though development for that purpose would not be allowed by the plan. I pose the question, what community facilities in this area are going to be provided for the increased population in this precinct? 14 and 16 Victoria Street must be retained and must have an adaptive reuse function. The terraces have been an important part of Cogra's urban and heritage fabric since the 1890s. They are an important part of the streetscape in Victoria Street, and they must continue to be so into the future. It is imperative that the heritage listing on these properties remain.
All right, thank you, Ms. Beale. I'll just see if there are any questions to the panel. No. Thank you, ma'am. Our next submitter are Nolene Ross and Jocelyn Gooch. Please come forward, ladies. Now, we visited your site earlier today.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today and the opportunity to address you directly. I hope after seeing our home today, the subject of this planning proposal, you can see the overwhelming merits of this proposal. Since it was first proposed that Cogra North would be upzoned, we have used every means at our disposal to have our voice heard. We have written submissions at every public consultation phase, highlighting our loss of amenity and our fear that our homes will be left isolated if the heritage listing of 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra, was not removed, or an amalgamation clause included in the amendment to the LEP and the DCP. Our voices appeared to fall on deaf ears until at the council meeting on the 18th of December 2017, it was resolved that, quote, council endorse a detailed review be undertaken with respect to consideration of the heritage listings of numbers 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra, and should it be identified that the properties do not have heritage value, that a planning proposal be prepared at the applicant's cost to Cogra LEP 2012 to remove the heritage listing from the properties. End of quote. As a result, council invited both myself and the owner of 16 Victoria Street, Mr. Griffiths, to meet with council's manager of strategic planning to determine what they called, quote, the best course of action, end of quote. They recommended submitting this planning proposal. A meeting was also held with the General Manager, Gail Connolly, in June 2018, following her letter to our neighbour, Mr. Griffiths, at number 16 Victoria Street, Cogra, where she stated, quote, it should be noted that Council has agreed that a review of the heritage significance of the property and number 14 may occur at your expense. This resolution was reached having regards to the information submitted by Council's Heritage Advisor with the Cogra North DCP preparation, which revealed that 14 to 16 Victoria Street could potentially be removed from Schedule 5 Heritage Schedule. If it can be demonstrated that future planning policies would probably diminish the setting of the place, end of quote. Ms. Connolly went on to write that, quote, since that time, Council is aware that 11 to 13-storey developments have been proposed along Victoria Street on both sides of 14 to 16 Victoria Street. It is noted that these proposals have potential to diminish the setting of your property. End of quote. These are the General Manager's words, not mine. Can I please ask you to now view figure 9 on page 15 of the planning proposal? I've got one here. There's the planning proposal.
Our page numbering will be different.
One that's in our planning proposal. We've got a copy. This is when we find it, page 15.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, all right.
Sorry. So this is an artist's impression submitted as part of our neighbour's DA to build a 12-storey residential apartment block. Clearly shows our home overshadowed and overlooked, isolated by Council's current planning policies. Can I ask you to now look at page 216, figure 2 of Council's report to the panel on this matter.
Sorry, what?
Page 216, sorry, figure 2 on 216.
Yep.
Thank you. Once again, this diagram demonstrates the reality of what we are facing. Council has put no measures in place to protect our amenity as a low-rise residential home. We are the yellow star in the centre. On this page and in point 25, the author of the report references number 2 Victoria Street, Cogra as a heritage item that has been incorporated into an approved development. However, that site was the subject of an amalgamation clause in the LEP and DCP. Numbers 14 to 16 Victoria Street were not afforded this protection. The reality is that we cannot sell our homes, our houses. We've been trying for 5 years. No one wants them. Our feedback is that developers will not take the risk. It is unfair to use number 2 Victoria Street, Cogra as an example of where a developer took a risk and valued and retained a heritage item by incorporating it into their development because they had no choice. It is also unfair for the author of the report to use number 8 Victor Street, Cogra as an example comparable to ours, as its heritage significance is far, far greater than ours. On page 222 of the report, in point 33, it stated that 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra are superior examples of 19th century Victorian Italianate terraces. This is not evidenced by any heritage assessment or existing statement of significance, and as such cannot be used as evidence that the planning proposal is inconsistent with South District Plan Priority S6. Similarly, and also on page 220 and in point 40, our planning proposal is point 40. Our planning proposal. Sorry. Page 222.
Thank you.
And in point 40, our planning proposal is assessed against draft local strategic planning statement. The finalisation of this draft is set for March 2020 and cannot be used as a tool to assess our proposal as it has not yet been implemented. Councillors stated in their report, page 213.7, that numbers 14 to 16 Victoria Street would be suitable as commercial or retail premises. But we are not proposing a development. We are homeowners, residents, ratepayers, not retailers. This is our residential home. We have to live in it, not sell stuff from it. We're public servants, but I see why council are raising this. I mean, who would want to live in them, raise a family in them? Overshadowed and overlooked by dozens of high-rise apartments. I think council is losing, if not completely lost, line of sight here. Losing sight of the individual, the family, the resident, the ratepayer. Council's failure to protect us, our family and our home has resulted in lodging of this planning proposal. We've had no choice. Our houses are falling apart. We're not spending money on them because to do so would be to throw good money after bad. We've had our child there, but we never thought we would still be living there or have to raise her there. We bought a lovely house, a home, 20 years ago in a quiet, low-rise residential neighbourhood with 3 bedrooms and a swimming pool, and a slow-moving and heartless bureaucracy has just taken it away, but left us there to rot. We cannot sell our homes, believe me. My neighbour and I have tried both. Who would want to live there? But who would want to live there? We certainly don't, not anymore. The houses are being knocked down around us, the neighbourhood's gone, but we are trapped. Nobody's buying, nobody will. Not with this heritage listing attached and the very real prospect of 12 to 13-storey towers on all boundaries shooting up over the next 2 years. The walls are already cracking, as our structural engineer report testifies.
Yep, and you showed us that today.
Yep. Our planning proposal did not come out of the blue, but as a result of the advice of council. It came as a direct result of the recommendations of council's previous heritage advisor, adopted by the councillors on the 18th of December 2017, and then from advice from Catherine McMahon, Manager Strategic Planning, and Gail Connolly, the General Manager. This is referenced on page 215 of the report in point 17. 215, yeah, sorry, point 17. Georges River Council can't have their cake and eat it too. You can't dramatically rezone an area with heritage listed houses in them, then arbitrarily protect some and leave others and expect that to be okay. If Georges River Council valued heritage, they would not have so aggressively upzoned Cogra North in the first place. If they valued heritage, they would have heeded the advice of their original heritage advisor, instead of shopping around for a new advisor whose opinion will now suit their current position. I feel that our planning proposal has successfully demonstrated that Georges River Council's planning policies will and currently are irredeemably diminishing the setting of numbers 14 to 16 Victoria Street, Cogra as heritage items. I know Louisa Alessi's heritage assessment supports this, and it is a strong argument, as is our planning proposal. I am disappointed that, on this occasion, Council is not supporting this proposal, but their machinations and motivations are unclear to me at the best of times. I'm hoping that with this local planning panel's collective wisdom, you will bring some sanity and reasonableness to the table and support our planning proposal. Thank you for your time today.
All right, thank you for that detailed submission. Please remain seated and I'll see if there are any questions. Yeah.
No questions. You mentioned, sorry, Mr. Chair, you mentioned correspondence with council. Is that in your proposal to council?
I have it here if you'd like it.
Yes.
Yeah,
you passed it.
okay, we'll receive that. I don't have any questions on your submission. I understand what you're saying. and having benefited the site view, I'm appreciative of your concerns. I'm obviously interested in listening to your consultants who are next up. So, yeah, we'll leave it there, and I'll ask the consultants now to come up.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, Stephen Davis from Urbis and Louisa Alessi, the Heritage Consultant. There's another Heritage Consultant as well. Oh, sorry, Aaron Sutherland from Sutherland Associates, Town Planner. Would all three of you please come forward? We'll just drag another chair, if we could.
Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold.
That's all right. Would you like a glass of water?
I'm fine at the moment. Thank you very much.
All right. So I think it's probably more beneficial to have the three of you address us. Clearly, we understand the argument. Probably my question first up is that, well, apart from the montage showing this site in isolation with tall buildings either side, what have you done in terms of thinking about how, or possibly there could be heritage incentive built into the planning controls using clause 510 out of the LEP? So in other words, how can you incorporate the existing fabric and something above it? How could that work, if at all?
Well, you can use 510, to provide a new use in a residential zone for a heritage item if that means it can be conserved. So that's given, and that has occurred in other cases.
Yes, it's occurred all over Sydney. And there's quite a number of good examples.
Example probably in front of you, which in your own report, which shows terraces sort of buried into later development, and that means that they're generally not suitable for residential use. So that our argument, I suppose, coming through from this, and I can comment more on the Council's Heritage Consultant's report, but it often leaves you with a very tokenistic example. I mean, I do have an example from Burwood, where there were two terraces in a street that's now completely demolished, basically, and the terraces have remained, but as you, notwithstanding the actual physical design of this building, you do end up with, I sort of feel like these remnant pieces of architecture set within a completely different context. Yes, there's a memory, I suppose, of the terrace form in this case, because when you're getting amalgamated development, residential is generally out of the question for these houses because of amenity overlooking. In the case of Burwood, they demolished the rear wings because of car parking requirements, and to get the car parking in, so that they reconstructed the wings. So in the end, you had two terraces with 2 rooms deep, sitting on a podium effectively, surrounded by development. And I think that to go to these sorts of lengths for heritage buildings and even use that clause to give them a new use is a very tokenistic way of dealing with heritage. If it were, I have to say, I'm not encouraging the demolition of heritage items, but I think that the street itself is, what you've got at the moment, you've got a row of houses in the street which is very, very pleasant, and these are the sort of dominant houses, effectively, the 2 terraces, and then you're putting them into a streetscape of 12-storey development, so their setting, and I disagree with the Council's report, the setting does change, and it does, and it isn't, he says it's not a fait accompli, it is. I mean, we know that these developments are occurring, we know the land is being sold, we know these properties are currently being isolated. If I suppose if the buildings were really rare or really significant, and I thought we were going to lose something that was a contribution really to the region or New South Wales, early farmhouse, early, something that was colonial, that had a uniqueness about it. A rarity to it, I wouldn't be here, because I think you'd have to sort of get the council to either do something about a DCP and this happened in Epping recently where they did allow, Parramatta Council allowed a cottage to be demolished because it was in the Epping town centre and it was being subjugated without any other controls by surrounding development. And so I just feel that for the amount of imposition on not so much, my role is if I just look at the fabric and the amount of imposition on the fabric and the setting is such that it's a very poor result from an urban design and design excellence point of view and a very poor outcome for heritage items. And I think it's what we don't want to see. And I think we should have, if we were really serious about these houses in this context, we could have looked at the whole area or zoned it for 2 to 3 story development, which might have given it some way of sitting into an urban environment that had a residential nature that was complementary to these buildings.
There's also the structural integrity of these buildings as well.
Yes.
Again, using
I think Louise might be
a tokenistic approach.
I can't dispute anything that Stephen said. I totally agree with everything. You've got to recall that the buildings are actually in quite a low scale, and I think that what contributes to their significance, the fact that it was part of that historic subdivision and very low scale development, which highlights the buildings. I mean, they're 2 scale, they stand out. But I think, once you start adding considerably larger building footprints, amalgamating sites and so forth, I think that the setting will be drastically affected. And yeah, we can talk about retention. I'm like Stephen, I'm not for demolishing items either, but residential use will not work for those buildings if you start putting all these developments, which are real. It is happening. So,
can I ask what sort of types of uses would you think would happen if they were retained and there was a structure built above them?
Honestly, current zoning, there's only residential, and I think they'll be empty and be left to ruin. And I think, like Stephen, I've seen where they have been amalgamated, and I think we've all seen examples where there's so many that are unsuccessful. But usually the rear wings do get demolished because the developers are always typically trying to encroach and get as much area as possible for the new development and development that's going to make the money. And so there's considerable impact, and not to mention the impact during construction. I understand since the demolition of the buildings in Stanley Street, there's been quite a lot of structural issues with the buildings, and a lot more cracking has occurred just in the recent past and in the recent
that was evident today when we had a look at one of the sites.
And that's the concern too. And I think there was a structural report that has been done, and that raised similar issues that when you're talking 3-story basements next to, on the other side of the fence, then that's obviously going to have some impact on the structure of the buildings. And also, who can guarantee that any developer will actually try and protect the buildings? There's all those sort of issues.
Could I just make that point about the use? I mean, I suppose it could end up as sort of what I call B-grade office space. You get 4 rooms and maybe some facilities out the back. And then if you're keeping the internal as a heritage item, you could say we could keep the staircase. Then you don't have disability access to that first floor. So ultimately then somebody feels is going to have to integrate it in some way to provide for a lift or access if it's actually going to be those 2 rooms upstairs or 3 rooms upstairs are going to be used in any meaningful way. So then it starts these things start another process when you start adapting buildings of that scale. So,
what troubles me, if I may, Mr. Chair, just make a few comments, is that before we even get to the point of how could you potentially reuse these buildings, and certainly clause 5.10 allows that, is the fact that these buildings weren't included in any particular amalgamation pattern or requirement in the DCP, in the DCP or the LEP. My clients objected in the first instance. They bought these properties, into a glass of water. Thank you.
Actually,
second panel for the day today.
I haven't used that, so it's all yours.
So in the first instance, my clients objected to the proposal They bought the property as their home, as you've heard, some 20 odd years ago, raised concern about the significant adverse amenity impact. They're not developers, and they raised that with council during that period of time, looking at the rezoning. Secondly, they requested that if the rezoning was to proceed, that the heritage listing be removed, obviously to allow them to move on and not be in this circumstance, which is something all the neighbours have enjoyed. And then finally, they've requested that if the heritage listing was not removed, that an amalgamation clause mandate that their property is included. None of that's occurred. Their personal experience, which is more real than any hypothetical that anyone can put today, is that nobody's interested in purchasing their properties, and they're facing the very real prospect that they, excuse me, that they will be isolated. So in the event that they're isolated, the capacity to adaptively reuse these properties excuse me, is greatly diminished. You have two terrace houses in the middle of a residential zone. I'll just grab some more water, sorry.
Yeah. Hence, that's the question that I asked, is I'm interested to explore the possibility of adaptively reusing these terrace houses for a use which could be a special purpose use, another permitted use under a scheduled use, whereby you maintain the fabric, so you win on that front.
Yes.
And then we move to, well, how do we incentivise the land as such to be an item that can be built upon,
yes,
where a developer would obviously profit from the effort, but then the community still retains the heritage items.
That's
if that means it's, and again, I'm just throwing hypotheticals around. If it's a small little commercial use, that then raises the issue of, well, how does it actually stand on its own 2 feet when it's dilapidated, or there's issues with the structural integrity of the buildings? I mean, it seems to me that those are issues that might need to be traversed.
Well, so there's a flow-on effect. So in the first instance, they don't have the protection currently. Yeah. There's a very real prospect that an application will be lodged adjacent to them before there's any opportunity to amend planning controls to deal with that. Yeah. But then we still then move on to the real issue, which is the heritage value. So, is it reasonable to say that there's no certainty that there won't be an adverse impact? With all the will in the world, can you achieve a skillful design that can successfully preserve in a meaningful way the heritage value of these buildings? And do you say that there's no setting that's relevant here, other than the front fence and the boundaries of the property, which is suggested by Council's heritage consultant? We certainly disagree with that. So I'm of the view that you cannot meaningfully incorporate these without significant adverse impact. And then you really must question what's the end game here with keeping these terraces. So there's 4 heritage opinions at the moment, and I know it's not a democratic process in terms of the number of heritage consultants, but I guess what I'm saying is that Council's original heritage consultant certainly had the view that the value is diminished to such an extent as to warrant delisting. We have 2 experts here, and Mr. Davies, I don't need to wax lyrical about his credentials. You're well aware is that the chair of the New South Wales Heritage Council. And what I'm saying is that the collective opinion, the majority opinion, is that the dilution is so significant that in the end, removal is warranted. Okay.
All right.
I think you also have to bear in mind under the clauses of the LEP, where the LEP says that for heritage items, it's not just about the fabric, but it's also about the setting and the views to the building. And I think that the fabric obviously is going to be impacted by any potential work, even if you keep the item and integrate it. The setting is all but gone and drastically changed, and will be impacted by much larger buildings, and the views to and from the item as well will be drastically affected. So I think you need to consider all of those aspects in addition to finding appropriate use.
Okay. Questions, panel?
You might not be able to answer this, but I'm just curious to know. So obviously, if the listing was removed, it'd be safe to assume that the buildings will be demolished.
Yes.
And you referred to the whole site isolation question. we've got a DA on one side already that's obviously fully formed and lodged and being assessed.
Yes.
So it means that in order for these sites to be redeveloped, they have to partner with the other 4 to 10 or some combination there, thereof.
Yes.
Have there been any discussions with the owners of some or any of those properties? I mean, there's no DA lodged for those properties, so we don't know how far advanced any of their plans are going. But I mean, if the delisting happens, the buildings are gone, but will we actually achieve a better built form outcome at the end of the day? I mean, I know it's a bit navel-gazing because we can't speak for those developers, but...
With the delisting?
Yeah. Have we heard from those people
yes,
to know
yes.
whether or not they would?
So my understanding is there is a developer who's optioned these sites, and their advice is that with the current listing, they're not prepared to purchase these 2 sites.
But if there's no current listing, would they be?
I believe so, yes. That would also allow the proposal to be more consistent with some of the other provisions of the DCP in terms of frontage and what have you as well. So my understanding is that in the absence, they'll be left, but if not, the other sites will move ahead. It's certainly enough to make a meaningful site there, 1,500 odd square metres as a parcel, and that's the reality of the situation that my client's facing. So, it's something very important for them to consider. I might just add, it's just a procedural matter, I suppose, is that the balance of the council's assessment is essentially circular in the report, in so much as it's stated that the application is contrary to various environmental heritage directions. My point is that if you form the view that the heritage significance is so greatly diminished, then one follows after the other. So it no longer fails those various directions.
In and of itself.
Yes, yes.
Understand. Mr. Brockwell?
No questions. I do have one question. When you did the heritage assessment, did you consider the cumulative impact of, if this heritage listing was removed, what the cumulative impact might be on the heritage for the whole sort of North Cogra area?
No, not the whole Cogra area, no.
Because I was just wondering if...
In so much as...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I did do a comparative analysis and we found that obviously that there were a number of other similar and comparable examples, and I think the former heritage advisor also at least noted at least 2, and they are protected under the LEP as well. The only thing that I did look at, obviously, which happens a lot, if the listing is lifted and that the items are allowed to be demolished, then we would actually, usually a lot of councils would actually put conditions on that area that you might interpret, and I would actually argue that the whole street is a lovely street and that they all are representative and of value being part of that original Cogra estate subdivision. So I think it'd be nice to actually have some sort of interpretation of those buildings and that original subdivision. And I think that would actually be just as, it's one way that we would sort of mitigate the change, to the area, to interpret what was there.
So a photographic record.
Yeah, and then also on
something.
site you could have not just a plaque, we've used paving to, indicate the previous subdivision patterns or building footprints, photographs of the buildings and the streetscape. I think that would be a measure that could be
One of the buildings has actually got a nameplate, hasn't it?
Yes, well, they both had names, one Beatrice and Lilyville. Lilyville is still there, yeah.
That question does lead to the issue of pointing out there are other examples in the area. We noted that the council's heritage consultant said that Schedule 5 is not a repository for the best examples, and talks to other examples, but it appears that there's really no limit to the dilution of heritage significance that he would accept as dropping a building out of that category. Certainly there is. Logically, there's always a threshold of dilution, and we say that that's been reached in this instance by council's actions with the upzoning.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, panel, thank you for your time,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your submissions.
I'll give you your water back, but you probably don't want it.
So you can actually finish it if you want.
Thank you very much.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Georges River Local Planning Panel meeting for the 5th of September 2019. I declare the meeting closed at 5:22 p.m. I thank you for your attendance. The panel will now adjourn for its closed session to make decisions, and those decisions will be published on the council's website. Thank you very much for your attendance.